A single strike on 2 oil tankers in the narrowest waterway on Earth, and within hours, every intelligence desk in Washington was scrambling. But here is what almost nobody told you. That strike was not aimed at the United States. It was not even aimed at the UAE, whose flags were flying on those tankers. That strike was a message, carefully written, precisely delivered, and addressed to 2 capitals thousands of miles away. It was addressed to Moscow, and it was addressed to Beijing. And if you do not understand what Iran's new leadership just communicated with that single act of violence, then you do not understand the war that is actually being fought right now. You are watching the wrong screen. Today, I am going to show you exactly what Iran told Russia and China, why they said it now, and why the answer is going to reshape the global order for the rest of this decade. Welcome back. I am Professor Jiang, and on Jiang Military Point, we do not do panic and we do not do cheerleading. We follow the logic of power. We follow the incentives. We follow the geography. Because when you strip away the emotion and the headlines, the picture always becomes clear. I have spent months mapping out what is coming between now and 2030, the wars, the currency shifts, the economic breakpoints, and I put all of it into an ebook called The Next Global Shift. If you want to understand not just what is happening, but what to do about it, the link is in the description and the pinned comment. Now let us get into it. Let me start with what happened, because you need the facts before you can read the meaning underneath them. On the 13th of July, Iranian forces struck 2 tankers flying the flag of the United Arab Emirates inside the Strait of Hormuz. Within hours, President Trump announced that the United States was resuming a full blockade of Iranian ports. This came days after the ceasefire that Trump himself had declared was, in his words, no longer in effect. It came after a 3rd round of American strikes that hit roughly 140 targets across Iran. And it came after Iran had already hit a ship in that same strait just days before. So on the surface, the story writes itself. Iran is lashing out. Iran is escalating. Iran is desperate. That is what the anchors will tell you tonight. And that reading is not just shallow. It is dangerously wrong. Because here is the question nobody in the mainstream is asking. Why those tankers? Iran has the ability to strike a lot of targets. It has coastal missile batteries. It has drone swarms. It has fast attack boats. It has naval mines. It has been perfecting for 20 years. If Iran simply wanted to hurt America, there are American assets all over the Gulf. If Iran simply wanted to hurt Israel, it has proxies positioned to do exactly that. So why did the new leadership in Tehran choose 2 Emirati oil tankers as the object of this particular strike? That is the entire mystery. And once you answer it, everything else falls into place. To understand the answer, you first have to understand who is actually making decisions in Iran right now. Because the man who used to make them is gone. The supreme leader is dead, and Iran has spent the last weeks in a quiet, ruthless internal contest over who inherits that authority. I have covered this on the channel before, but here's what matters for today. The faction that has come out on top is not the faction of the pragmatists. It is not the technocrats who want to reopen negotiations, ease sanctions, and rebuild the economy. The faction that is now steering Iran is the hardline core of the Revolutionary Guard, the men who see this war not as a catastrophe to be survived, but as an opportunity to be seized. And that difference in leadership changes everything about how you read that tanker strike. Because a pragmatist government does not attack Emirati ships. A pragmatist government protects its relationship with the Gulf, keeps oil flowing, and tries to peel the Arab states away from Washington through diplomacy. But this new leadership did the opposite. It reached out and hit the tankers of a Gulf neighbor. That is not the act of a country trying to make friends in the region. That is the act of a country that has already decided the region is secondary. Iran has made a choice, and the choice is this. The future is not west, and it is not the Gulf. The future is north and east. The future is Russia and China. And the tanker strike was how Tehran told them so. Let me explain the geography, because geography is where the truth always lives. Look at a map of the Strait of Hormuz. It is a narrow bend of water, about 33 kilometers across at its tightest point, with Iran on the northern shore and the Arabian Peninsula on the southern shore. Through that gap flows roughly 1/5 of all the oil consumed on the planet, every single day. Now here is the part the headlines skip. Where does that oil go? A huge share of it does not go to Europe, and it does not go to America. It goes east. China pulls a massive percentage of its imported crude through that strait. India depends on it. Japan and South Korea would be paralyzed without it. So the Strait of Hormuz is not primarily an American lifeline. It is an Asian lifeline. It is the artery that feeds the industrial heart of the countries Iran is now trying to court. So think about what it means when Iran strikes tankers in that exact choke point. On one level, it is a threat. It says to the whole world, we can close this. We can turn off the tap. But the real audience for that message is not the United States, which produces most of its own energy now. The real audience is Beijing and Moscow, and the message is far more sophisticated than a simple threat. Iran is not saying to China, we will hurt you. Iran is saying to China, look how much power we hold over your survival. Look what we control. And then, and this is the crucial part, Iran is saying, and we have not used it against you. We are choosing to protect you. That is not a threat. That is a sales pitch. This is the piece that almost everyone misses. When you control a choke point that your potential ally depends on, restraint becomes the most valuable currency you have. Iran is demonstrating in real time that it can strangle the global oil market whenever it wants. And by carefully choosing to hit Emirati tankers tied to a Gulf state aligned with Washington, rather than disrupting the broader flow that feeds Asia, Iran is drawing a line. It is saying, our missiles are pointed at America's friends, not at yours. Ride with us, and this artery stays open for you. That is a message you can only send through action. You cannot send it in a phone call. You send it with a strike, precisely aimed, precisely limited. Now let me show you why Russia and China are listening so closely right now, because this is where the timing becomes everything. Russia is fighting a long war in Europe and living under the heaviest sanctions regime ever imposed on a major economy. To survive, Moscow has had to reroute almost its entire trade architecture. It needs corridors that run south and east, away from Western control. And one of the most important of those corridors runs directly through Iran. There is a trade and transport route, a network of rail and road and port connections that links Russia down through Iran to the warm water ports of the south, giving Moscow a path to global markets that no Western navy can easily cut. Iran is not just a partner in that corridor. Iran is the keystone. Without Iran, the corridor collapses. So when Iran demonstrates that it can survive an American bombing campaign and still control the Gulf, it is telling Moscow, your southern lifeline is intact, and it is in strong hands. China's calculation is different, but it points in the same direction. China's entire strategy for the coming decades depends on securing energy and securing trade routes that do not run through waters the American Navy dominates. Beijing has poured enormous investment into building overland and maritime connections across Asia, precisely so that it is not forever hostage to choke points it cannot defend. And Iran sits at the western hinge of that whole design, a stable, defiant, capable Iran that can keep the oil flowing east and keep American forces tied down in the Gulf is worth an enormous amount to Beijing. An Iran that collapses, or an Iran that caves to Washington and reopens to Western influence, would be a strategic disaster for China. So Beijing is watching that tanker strike and reading it exactly the way Tehran wants it read. It is reading it as proof that Iran is not folding. It is proof that Iran is still standing, still striking, still in control of the water. Here is the deeper logic, and I want you to sit with this because it is the heart of the whole thing. Iran cannot win a conventional war against the United States. The new leadership in Tehran knows this better than anyone. America has more aircraft, more precision weapons, more surveillance, more of everything that wins a straight fight. So Iran is not trying to win a straight fight. Iran is playing a completely different game. Iran is trying to prove that it is indispensable to the two powers who are already in a long confrontation with the United States. Iran's survival strategy is not military victory. It is strategic value. If Iran can make itself the essential partner of Russia and China, the piece that both of them need to complete their own plans, then Iran does not have to defeat America. It just has to become too useful to Moscow and Beijing to be allowed to fall. And that reframes the entire war. The bombing you are watching, the strikes on the 140 targets, the blockade of Iranian ports, all of that is America trying to break Iran before Iran finishes cementing itself as the indispensable node in the anti-Western bloc. And the tanker strike is Iran's answer. It is Iran saying to Washington, you can bomb me, but every time you do, you push me further into the arms of the two countries you fear most. And it is Iran saying to Moscow and Beijing, watch how I endure. Watch how I hold the straight. Watch how I choose to keep your oil flowing while I punish your enemies. That is not the behavior of a regime in its death throes. That is the behavior of a regime auditioning for a permanent seat at a new table. Now let me address the obvious objection, because a sharp viewer is already thinking it. If Iran wants to be China's essential energy partner, why would it strike tankers in the very strait that China depends on? Is that not self-defeating? And this is exactly where the precision matters. Iran did not close the strait. Iran did not sink a Chinese tanker or an Indian one. Iran hit ships tied to a Gulf rival that stands on the American side of this fight. The disruption was calibrated. It was loud enough to spike the oil price, loud enough to remind everyone who controls the tap, but targeted enough to signal exactly who is being punished and who is being protected. That distinction is the entire message. A country that just wanted chaos would have hit indiscriminately. A country sending a strategic signal hits with surgical selectivity. And the selectivity here was the point. Look at what happened to oil the moment that strike landed. Prices climbed, crude pushed higher, and every economy that imports energy felt the tremor. Now think about who profits from higher oil prices. Russia profits. Russia is one of the largest oil exporters on the planet, and higher prices pour money directly into the treasury that funds its war. So when Iran strikes a tanker and the price jumps, Iran is not just sending Moscow a political signal. It is putting cash in Moscow's pocket. That is a favor with a dollar value attached. And favors like that build alliances faster than any treaty ever signed. Iran is showing Russia, in the clearest possible terms, that our actions make you richer. Our defiance funds your survival. We are on the same side of the ledger. This is why I keep telling you that the Middle East conflict is no longer really about the Middle East. It has become the front line of a much larger contest. The contest between the American-led order that has run the world for decades and the emerging bloc that wants to replace it. Iran has made its choice about which side of that contest it belongs on. And the new leadership is signing its name to that choice, not with words, not with diplomacy, but with strikes in the water. Every tanker Iran hits is another sentence in a letter to Moscow and Beijing that reads, "We are with you, we are useful to you, and we will not break." Now let me tell you what to watch for next, because the logic of this points to some very specific things. The first thing to watch is whether Russia and China begin to respond in ways that are more than rhetorical. So far, both have offered Iran diplomatic cover, statements of concern, calls for restraint aimed at Washington. But the real test is material support. Watch for movement of components, of technology, of the pieces that harden Iran's defenses and extend its reach. If Iran's audition is working, you will see the payoff arrive quietly, in shipments and cooperation agreements, not in press conferences. And you will see it arrive along exactly the corridors we talked about, the routes that run north through Iran and east across Asia, the routes that no Western Navy patrols. The second thing to watch is the American response to the response. Trump has already reinstated the blockade of Iranian ports. But a blockade is a blunt instrument, and it carries a hidden risk that I do not think has been fully priced in. A blockade of Iranian ports does not just squeeze Iran. It squeezes the customers who buy Iranian oil, and the biggest customer of Iranian oil is China. So the American blockade is not only a move against Tehran, it is, whether Washington intends it or not, a move that touches Beijing directly. And that is how regional wars become global ones. Not through a single dramatic decision, but through a chain of pressures, where squeezing one country automatically squeezes another, until the powers that were standing on the sidelines find themselves pulled onto the field. The third thing to watch is the Gulf. Because the Gulf states are the ones caught in the middle of all of this, and the tanker strike was aimed at them too, in a different register. Saudi Arabia and the UAE built their entire modern existence on one assumption, that the United States would guarantee their security and keep the region stable enough for their economies to flourish. That assumption is now cracking in real time. They are managing the fallout of a war they did not want and could not prevent. And they are quietly asking themselves a question that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. If the American umbrella cannot keep our tankers safe, do we need to start making our own arrangements? Do we need to hedge? Do we need to talk to the very powers America is trying to isolate? Every tanker Iran strikes accelerates that question in the minds of the Gulf leadership. And that too is part of the message. Iran is showing the Gulf that American protection has limits, and it is showing Russia and China that the Gulf's loyalty to Washington is no longer guaranteed. One strike, and it speaks to three audiences at once. That is not desperation. That is design. So let me pull it all together, because I want you to walk away seeing the whole board and not just the last piece that moved. Iran lost its supreme leader and came out of that internal struggle with a hardline leadership that has decided its future lies with Russia and China, not with the West and not with the Gulf. That leadership cannot beat America in a conventional war. So it is playing a different game entirely, a game of making itself indispensable to the two great powers already locked in confrontation with Washington. And the tool it is using to play that game is the one piece of geography no one can take away from it, the Strait of Hormuz. Every strike in that water is a message. To Russia, it says we raise your oil revenue and we keep your southern corridor open. To China, it says we keep your energy flowing east and we keep America pinned down here so it cannot fully turn to face you. To the Gulf, it says American protection is thinner than you thought. And to Washington, it says every bomb you drop pushes me closer to the very alliance you are terrified of. That is what Iran's new leadership told Russia and China with one strike. Not a cry of pain. A calculated pitch, delivered in the only language that great powers truly respect, which is the demonstrated ability to control something they cannot live without. And the most dangerous thing about this moment is that the pitch might be working. Because the more the West treats Iran purely as a problem to be bombed, the more it confirms Iran's argument to Moscow and Beijing that the three of them are natural partners against a common adversary. The war is not just being fought over Iran. It is being fought over which side of the new global order Iran ends up on. And right now, with every tanker in the strait, Iran is casting its vote. Here is the uncomfortable truth I will leave you with. The people who read this only as escalation, only as Iran lashing out, are going to be blindsided by what comes next, because they are watching the punches and missing the strategy behind them. But you are not going to be blindsided, because now you can see the logic underneath. You can see the map. You can see the incentives. And when the next strike lands, or the next shipment moves, or the next Gulf state quietly reaches out to Beijing, you will understand exactly what it means. If this breakdown helped you see the picture more clearly, do me a favor and subscribe to Jiang Military Point, because this story is going to move fast, and I am going to be tracking every turn of it. And if you want the full framework for what is coming between now and 2030, the conflicts, the energy shocks, the shifts in who holds real power, that is all in my ebook, The Next Global Shift, linked in the description and the pinned comment. I read your questions, so tell me in the comments. Do you think Russia and China accept Iran's pitch, or do they keep Tehran at arm's length? I will see you in the next one.